There's a new road tax being talked about for electric cars, and it has absolutely ignited an explosive debate all across the UK. Some people are saying, yeah, this is a fair and necessary fix to a big budget problem. But others, they're calling it a Trojan horse for government surveillance. So, which one is it? Let's get into it. It all comes down to this number, £28 billion. That is how much the UK government brings in every single year from the tax on petrol and diesel. But, as we all start switching over to electric cars, that huge number is about to shrink and shrink fast. And that creates a very, very expensive problem. Okay, so to really get our heads around what's at stake here, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dig into that £28 billion black hole. Then we'll look at the super controversial 3p per mile idea, we'll weigh up all the arguments for and against, and finally, we're going to explore what this could all mean for the future of driving for every single one of us. Right, so the heart of this whole debate is this massive, looming gap in the country's budget. The big switch to EVs, it's great for the planet for sure, but it's also about to blow a giant hole in the nation's finances. So here's how it works right now. When you go and fill up your petrol or diesel car, a big chunk of that money, we're talking about 52 pence for every liter, is something called fuel duty. It's basically a pay-as-you-drive tax. But what if you drive an EV? Well, you pay zero, not a penny. And this chart right here really shows you the scale of the problem. The UK's owned Office for Budget Responsibility did the math, and they're forecasting that by the end of this decade, that fuel duty income is going to plummet by over £5 billion. That is a huge shortfall that has to come from somewhere. Which brings us to the one proposal that has caused all this chaos. A story got leaked to the Daily Telegraph suggesting the government is seriously looking at bringing in a pay-per-mile tax. But, and this is the key bit, specifically for electric vehicles. So the rumored plan is a 3 pence charge for every single mile an EV driver travels. For someone doing an average of, say, 8,000 miles a year, that's an extra bill for around £250. And again, this would only be for EVs. And the reaction? It was instant and it was intense. As this YouTube commentator put it, the news was met with this mix of genuine outrage from people who own EVs and, well, mockery from people who are a bit skeptical of the whole electric thing. It really, really hit a nerve. Now look, despite all that backlash, there is a strong case for this tax. The people who support it argue that this isn't about punishing EV drivers at all. It's actually about creating a much fairer system for everyone who uses the roads. So, here's the crucial point. If you actually break down the numbers, the average petrol driver is paying around 6.7 pence per mile in fuel duty right now. The tax being proposed for EV drivers? Just 3 pence. So even with this new charge, they'd still be paying less than half the tax per mile of a petrol driver. But you know what? The fairness argument actually goes even deeper than that. There was this fascinating report that found our current system creates what they call a poverty premium, where the tax hits the people who can least afford it the hardest. Let me just show you what they mean. This is pretty staggering, actually, because lower-income families tend to have older, less efficient cars, but they drive them for shorter, essential trips. They end up paying a way higher rate of tax for every mile they drive. We're talking 10p per mile compared to just 3.2p for the wealthiest drivers. A pay-per-mile system could, in theory, fix that unfairness. Okay, so let's flip the coin now, because the opposition to this plan is fierce. Critics are basically saying that from both an economic angle and a privacy angle, this is just a terrible idea. The official UK car industry body, the SMMT, they came out swinging against this. Their whole argument is that the government has these ambitious goals to get everyone into EVs, but then they turn around and propose a new tax that's just going to scare people away. They're calling it a huge strategic mistake. But for a lot of people, the biggest fear isn't really about the cost. It's about privacy. Commentators have been warning that this is a Trojan horse for mass surveillance. The argument is that the real goal here isn't to fill a budget hole, it's to create a system that tracks and controls where we all go. So what does the public think about all this? Well, a survey from CarWow shows it's complicated. Opinion is split right down the middle. 49% of drivers think a pay-per-mile system is just fundamentally fairer. But at the same time, 51%, an almost identical number, say that if we do this, it has to apply to all cars, not just EVs. And then you've got this significant chunk, 14%, who are just worried it's going to make driving something they can't afford anymore. So, to quickly sum up the case against it, first, critics say it totally contradicts the government's own green targets. Second, it could create this massive, expensive new bureaucracy just to run it all. Third, it might really punish rural drivers who have no choice but to travel long distances. And finally, it could just shake everyone's confidence right when the switch to EVs needs to be speeding up. So, with all these arguments flying around, where is this actually going? Let's take a look at how a system like this might even work in the real world. And, is the UK the only one thinking about this? The short answer is no. The UK is definitely not alone. New Zealand has already added EVs to its road charging system this year. The UK is looking at a 2028 start date. And the Netherlands? They're planning to go even further and tax all cars per kilometer by 2030. This is absolutely a global trend. And how would they even track your mileage? Well, there are basically three options on the table. The simplest is you just report it yourself, guess your annual mileage. A more solid way would be to use the official mileage that's recorded at your car's annual MOT check. And then there's the most controversial one, a telematics black box inside your car that tracks everything automatically. So, we're left with this one fundamental question. Is a pay-per-mile tax just the fair price we all have to pay for a greener future? Or is it a surveillance toll booth on the road to giving up our own privacy? That, right there, is the £28 billion question.